gentlemen.
Good morning.
Morning.
How you feeling today?
Great, thank you.
That is Roger Stone, the president's longtime confidant, pleasant as he walked into court inside a judge blasting him, saying he was prosecuted for covering up for the president during the Mueller investigation. Stone sentenced to more than 3 years in prison. But the question tonight is a presidential pardon looming. And the news just breaking that U.S. intelligence officials reportedly warned Washington officials about new efforts from Russia to back Trump in the 2020 election. The president furious, believing Democrats will use this information against him. The fallout from the rumble in Vegas, Michael Bloomberg's first time in years on a debate stage, and he struggled at times. The candidates ganging up on him and each other in a free-for-all just days before the Nevada caucus. And our series running mates, Chasten Buttigieg, the husband of Pete Buttigieg, why he fell in love with the presidential candidate, his own personal struggles with coming out, and what he thinks about America being ready to potentially elect the first gay president. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. We have a lot of news to get into, but the big story tonight, the sentencing of President Trump's longtime associate, Roger Stone. Stone was sentenced today to 40 months in federal prison for lying to Congress, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering during the Russia investigation. The judge's ruling comes during the president's relentless defense of Stone on Twitter that's created turmoil in the Justice Department. And the big question tonight, will the president pardon Stone? ABC News Chief Justice correspondent Pierre Thomas has more on that and today's sentencing.
Roger Stone, the so-called dirty trickster and longtime friend of President Trump, smiling as he walked into court today amid cheers and jeers. But the smile drained from his face as he got a blistering dressing down from Judge Amy Berman Jackson. Jackson making clear Stone's conviction on 7 felony counts, including lying to Congress and witness tampering, warranted severe punishment. The judge bluntly saying Stone was not prosecuted, as some have claimed, for standing up for the president. He was prosecuted for covering up for the president. Trump has been sounding off on the case for weeks.
They treated Roger Stone very badly.
Federal prosecutors initially recommending that Stone receive a 7 to 9 year prison sentence, only to be overruled by Attorney General William Barr.
Did you talk to the president at all about your decision regarding the recommendations? Never.
But today, Stone alone faced the wrath of a scolding judge. The truth still exists. The truth still matters. Roger Stone's insistence that it doesn't, his belligerence, his pride in his own lies are a threat to our most fundamental institutions, to the foundations of our democracy. If it goes unpunished, everyone loses. The judge sentenced him to 3 years and 4 months in prison. The big question tonight, will Stone get a presidential pardon? The answer, not yet.
I'm following this very closely, and I want to see it play out to its fullest because Roger has a very good chance of exoneration, in my opinion.
And Pierre Thomas joins us now. And Pierre, Stone has challenged the verdict in his case. So what happens next for him, and could it potentially delay any pardon action on behalf of the president?
Lindsay, Stone is calling for a new trial alleging jury misconduct. So now it appears that the president is going to wait and see how that plays out before making a decision about a pardon.
And your exclusive interview with the Attorney General still causing serious fallout, Pierre. And now after this sentencing of Stone, where does Barr stand after a week of tensions with the White House?
Lindsay, it's still a very fluid situation. The tension is still there. He's waiting to see how the president responds to the Stone sentencing today. There are some red lines that he is very concerned about. Comments on the jury, comments on the judge. We have to wait and see how it all plays out.
All right. Thank you again, Pierre Thomas, for us in Washington. The sentencing of Roger Stone, convicted as part of the Mueller investigation, took place as we're also learning of an intelligence briefing that has left President Trump furious. U.S. intelligence officials reportedly warned House leaders in recent days that Russia is once again interfering in the American election process with the goal of trying to get President Trump reelected. The president is now purportedly angry because he believes Democrats could use that information against him. The news comes as the president moved to replace the acting director of national intelligence with a loyalist. ABC News Chief White House correspondent Jonathan Karl has more on this developing story. Jonathan Karl joins us now from the White House. And John, is this just another sign of the president being emboldened post-acquittal?
It sure seems that way. Look, he does not like the idea of Adam Schiff, who led the impeachment inquiry in the House, being briefed on anything. And that's a difficult situation because Adam Schiff is the chairman of the intelligence community. So when he found out about this, likely from Republicans who were at the briefing, he became enraged and he acted very quickly. We now have a new acting director of national intelligence. That said, keep in mind that McGuire himself was an acting director of national intelligence, and his term would have been up. You can only serve as acting for a limited amount of time. He was going to have to leave by March 12th anyway.
And John, based on your intelligence on the ground there, does it seem like the president's staff now avoids giving him any kind of information that might upset him? Is it the whole process just political now?
There's no question that that is going on, and frankly, Lindsay, it's been going on for a long time. I have been told that during Kirstjen Nielsen's time as the Homeland Security Secretary, she actually only was in a briefing once during her entire tenure that brought up the issue of election security, and that briefing did not go well. It is not a subject that the president wants to hear about.
Thank you very much, Jonathan Karl, for us again at the White House. And if you saw it last night, well, you already know the gloves came off at last night's Democratic debate, proving once and for all what happens in Vegas doesn't always stay in Vegas. The candidates challenged each other on a range of topics from health care to immigration, but there was some unity, at least when it came to going after billionaire Michael Bloomberg. ABC's Mary Bruce has more.
Michael Bloomberg today tried to laugh off his rocky debate debut.
So how was your night last night?
Senator Elizabeth Warren ready with this blistering attack.
I'd like to talk about who we're running against. A billionaire who calls women fat broads and horse-faced lesbians. And no, I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Mayor Bloomberg.
Bloomberg forced to defend himself against allegations of sexism.
In my company, lots and lots of women have big responsibilities. They get paid exactly the same as men. And in my in City Hall, the top person, my deputy mayor, was a woman, and 40% of our commissioners were women.
And I hope you heard what his defense was. I've been nice to some women. That just doesn't cut it.
The senator pressed Bloomberg on claims that he tried to silence stories of alleged sexual harassment at his company.
Mr. Mayor, are you willing to release all of those women from those non-disclosure agreements so we can hear their side of the story?
We have a very few non-disclosure agreements.
How many is
Let me
that?
finish.
How many is that?
None of them accuse me of doing anything other than maybe they didn't like the joke I told. And let me just put, there's agreements between two parties that wanted to keep it quiet. We're not going to get to end these agreements because they were made consensually, and they have every right to expect that they will stay private.
If they want to release it, they should be able to release themselves.
Can I add a word to
Say
this?
yes.
Bloomberg's record as mayor under attack from frontrunner Senator Bernie Sanders.
Mr. Bloomberg had policies in New York City of stop and frisk, which went after African-American and Latino people in an outrageous way.
If I go back and look at my time in office, the one thing that I'm really worried about, embarrassed about, was how it turned out with stop and frisk.
And it's not whether he apologized or not, it's the policy. The policy was abhorrent, and it was, in fact, a violation of every right people have.
Bloomberg and Sanders are trying to make this a two-man race, but Mayor Pete Buttigieg with a warning to voters.
Let's put forward somebody who's actually a Democrat. Look, we shouldn't have to choose between one candidate who wants to burn this party down and another candidate who wants to buy this party out.
Buttigieg slammed Senator Amy Klobuchar for recently blanking on the name of the Mexican president.
You're literally in part of the committee that's overseeing these things.
Are you trying to say that I'm dumb, or are you mocking me here, Pete?
I'm saying that you shouldn't trivialize
I made an error. People sometimes forget names.
Can I just defend Senator Klobuchar for a minute? This is not right. I understand that she forgot a name. It happens. It happens to everybody on this stage.
Bloomberg tried to make the case that a Democratic socialist like Sanders can't take on Trump.
I can't think of ways that would make it easier for Donald Trump to get reelected than listening to this conversation. It's ridiculous. We're not going to throw out capitalism. We tried that. Other countries tried that. It was called communism, and it just didn't work.
It's not communism, Mr. Bloomberg. That's a cheap shot.
Today, Bloomberg warned again that Sanders can't win.
He just said, quote, if we choose a candidate who appeals to a small base like Senator Sanders, it will be a fatal error.
See, the small base is the working families of this country, which are the vast majority of the country. No, I think the small base that Mr. Bloomberg appeals to is the billionaire class.
And Mary Bruce joins us live from Vegas. The debate was quite the departure from the prior face-offs. How much of that was driven by Bloomberg's presence, do you think?
Lindsay, I think it was driven almost entirely by the presence of Michael Bloomberg. In fact, Bernie Sanders today told me point blank that the reason this debate was so explosive is because Bloomberg was finally on that stage. Look, there is a lot of pent-up frustration and anger, quite frankly, from the other candidates. Remember, they have now spent weeks campaigning, working out on the campaign trail, competing in these early states, participating in other debates, and Michael Bloomberg has skipped almost all of that. Instead, he has been spending hundreds of millions of dollars on campaign ads, and it seems to be working. He is rising in the polls. That has led to a lot of anger and frustration. It isn't sitting well with his rivals.
And Elizabeth Warren, she was certainly leading the attacks last night. What does this mean for her campaign?
Yeah, she really came to play last night. I mean, repeatedly, she just pummeled Michael Bloomberg, going after his record over and over and over again. And it wasn't just Bloomberg. She attacked everyone across the board. And it does seem to be paying off. Since the debate last night, Warren has already raised $5 million. We caught up with her today, though, and I asked her if this all comes too little too late. But she insists that only a small fraction of voters have had a chance to vote so far. Lindsay, she says she's just getting started.
Yeah, it seemed that way. I mean, just watching her, it felt like after everything she said, it was kind of like, all right, who's next? Who else wants a piece of this? You know, it was interesting to watch, no doubt. Fiery exchange. Thanks so much, Mary. And now we have two political analysts who will help us dive deeper into what last night's debate means for the Nevada caucus and beyond. Adusi Demese was Cory Booker's presidential campaign manager and is now a political consultant at 50+1. Welcome to you. And Matthew Dowd, he is our ABC News political analyst. So, Matt, I want to start with you. This debate felt like a turning point in the race, especially because Bloomberg was on stage for the first time. So how did this impact his chances, do you think, after his debate performance?
Well, Lindsay, I think it's a significant point in the debate, not only because Bloomberg got added to the stage, but the timing, which is we're right before one of the most crucial events of the entire campaign, which is Super Tuesday, where a huge amount of delegates will be at stake. I think this could have a significant negative effect on Michael Bloomberg. We will see. We won't probably notice that until the next few weeks when we see races start coming in that he's actually competing in this. But what Michael Bloomberg did is he's operated under this fog of advertising, and this is the first real moment that people had to watch this debate. And from what I can tell, something around 20 million people watched this debate, so they were very interested. And Michael Bloomberg couldn't handle some of the basic questions you should be prepared for: stop and frisk, his record as mayor, all of the NDAs with women, multiple things that you would think he would be prepared to handle. He didn't do well. So there was this idea of Michael Bloomberg that people had from advertising, and then they saw Michael Bloomberg, and that distinction or that difference was huge. I think it'll have a negative effect on him. How long-lasting it is, we don't know, because there's another debate come next Tuesday.
And Adisu, Elizabeth Warren was more fired up on that debate stage than she's been in the past, certainly. And as Mary reported, since last night, her campaign has raised more than $5 million. So is that spark of fight that she brought to last night's debate, is that certainly, I guess, appealing to voters?
Yeah, I think so. Look, she was like Michael Corleone in The Godfather. She was coming to settle all the family business last night. But I think the most important number is the one that Marion, you talked about, $5 million. That is a lot of money. Senator Booker's campaign in a full quarter, we raised $5 million last year. So just to give people a sense of perspective, to do that in 24 hours is amazing. But to be able to compete in Nevada this weekend, South Carolina next weekend, and as Matt said, most importantly on Super Tuesday, you got to fuel the tank up. And we've been talking about her now for several minutes on this program. I think that's exactly what she was trying to do. She succeeded at that. She raised some money, and now she's back in the fight to head towards March and beyond.
And Matt, today a new poll came out showing most Democratic candidates leading in potential matchups with Trump in Michigan and Pennsylvania. But Trump is coming out on top in Wisconsin. So what do you make of these numbers, or is it too early to be looking at these sort of matchups?
Well, I think it's too early to look at the general election matchups in a state-by-state scenario. We don't know what's going to come over the next 5 months. We don't know how the Democratic Party will come out of a convention in Milwaukee, how united they will be, what will happen in that. But I do think the part that's telling in this is that it looks like Pennsylvania has moved away from Donald Trump pretty precipitously, so I don't think it's even on the table anymore. But what's really concerning, I think should be concerning to the Democrats, is Wisconsin has moved towards the president in this. He barely won it. He won it by something like 20,000 votes or something last time in 2016. And so though the state polls, much is going to change. We have to figure what the convention is going to be, where the economy is, what Donald Trump's approval will be next October. I think those facts alone are concerning. Wisconsin has moved towards him, and Pennsylvania has moved away. And if that scenario unfolded today, Donald Trump would win the Electoral College again.
And Adisi, last question to you. We saw some surprises in Iowa and also New Hampshire. Is there anything that you feel confident about in predicting ahead of the Nevada caucus?
I think turnout is going to be really good. If you didn't see, they had a couple days of early vote over the last few days. Already about 75,000 people have caucused ahead of time. That's almost as many as caucused in the entirety of 2016. So I think it's going to be a pretty robust turnout for a caucus, which is good news. I think Tom Steyer is somebody to look at. He wasn't on the debate stage yesterday, but has been putting a lot of effort into that state and has a chance, I think, to perform well. And I think we could see a little bit of a muddle. I think Sanders is the favorite, but could see a lot of folks in the teens hovering around that 15% threshold, and we live to fight another day in South Carolina and beyond after that. But this thing has a lot of runway to go before we get a decision.
A lot of runway, exactly right. Adisi Demese and Matt Dowd, our thanks to both of you. Appreciate you joining us tonight. We are still waiting for a verdict in the trial of Harvey Weinstein. The jury will pick up deliberations again tomorrow morning for the 4th day in a row. This is obviously a complex and high-profile case, which could explain why it's taking so long to get a verdict. Weinstein is facing multiple felony charges, including rape and sexual assault. If convicted, he could face up to life behind bars. Turning now to the developments surrounding the coronavirus. There are confirmed cases in nearly 30 countries and more than 2,100 people dead. Among those fatalities, 2 are passengers on that cruise ship in Japan. As we learn more about the conditions on board and the crew's inability to successfully quarantine, even as more passengers are being allowed to return home. Meanwhile, in South Korea, the number of cases has spiked as the first virus-related death there, as the mayor of a city of millions warning residents to simply stay home. And some good news this evening for 63 Americans who were under quarantine at Marine Corps Air Station Miramar in San Diego. They were just bussed off the base and are now free to go, while 2 people from their flight are being treated for confirmed cases. But we start with our senior foreign correspondent, Ian Pannell. He is in Japan with more on the dire situation on that docked cruise ship.
Tonight, this isolation unit in Spokane, Washington, used for the first time to care for 4 patients with COVID-19. The former passengers from the Diamond Princess taken by ambulance today from Travis Air Force Base.
We have a specialized team that trains and drills regularly to safely care for patients in situations just as these.
It comes as we learn of the first 2 deaths from the cruise ship, a Japanese couple in their 80s who were hospitalized days ago. Passengers who tested negative for the virus now trickling off the ship, but now a warning from the Japanese doctor who slammed his government's handling of the quarantine.
These people who were disembarked should be monitored for next 14 days. Possibly avoiding the contact with other people.
But those passengers can't return to the U.S. for 2 weeks. When he left the ship, Carl Goldman thought he was healthy, but was hit with a high fever on the flight home.
We can go for days feeling fine. It hits very, very, very fast.
He's now being treated for the virus in his biocontainment unit in Omaha.
We could have been exposing so many people to the virus not knowing we had it.
Over 7 weeks, COVID-19 has spread to 29 countries and territories, killing more than 2,000 and infecting more than 75,000, mostly in China. Tonight, 2.5 million residents in one Korean city ordered to stay indoors after a woman who authorities called a super spreader infected dozens in her own church.
And Ian Pannell joins us now live from Yokohama, Japan, where we've seen that cruise ship dock now for quite a while. Ian, with 2 dead, I imagine there's a great deal of scrutiny on that quarantine effort.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of scrutiny of it anyway, not least because some of those passengers who were cleared, some of the Americans amongst them, were then found to actually have the virus. So questions about the quarantine procedures are being carried out on the ship. And also, we'll remember there was the Japanese doctor who managed to sneak on board. He also raised concerns about what he called the red zones and the green zones. In other words, whether people who had the virus were being kept separately. So there's a lot of unhappiness. The Japanese authorities, meanwhile, are advising some of those passengers who are now leaving the ship to self-quarantine for 14 days. But it's not obligatory. So it's entirely possible that people passing through this airport here in Tokyo could still have the virus. So lots of questions unanswered and lots of concerns.
And Ian, I imagine lots of concern across Asia right now as we're seeing a number of cases spike in certain regions.
Yeah, that's right. Of course, China still remains overwhelmingly the epicenter where the vast majority of deaths have been. But the news coming out of Korea is deeply concerning for many people there. What we understand is that one woman who's been described by authorities as being a super spreader managed to infect as many as 40 people, certainly dozens of people, in her own church. Now, she belongs to a particular type of Christianity. It's been described as a cult by some. But either way, the way that they practice their religion involves them all sitting on the floor in fairly close confines, and she seems to pass this virus to a large number of other people, and that part of South Korea has now been put under special government management. It's not clear whether that's a quarantine or not, but there are 2 parts of Korea that are now receiving a lot of special attention and extra facilities, essentially with the South Korean authorities saying, look, originally we were alert to people coming into the country through airports like this. Now we're going to have to monitor what's going on inside the country to try and stop the spread of the virus. And I think many people have always said that although China was the epicenter, as time passed, although the numbers started to slow down, that this would be the risk, that there would be a significant outbreak in other countries, and that would then start to spread.
And Ian Pannell live for us from Tokyo. Our thanks to you, Ian. When we come back, the fire on the interstate, a tanker full of fuel bursting into flames during rush hour. The dash cam revealing new clues into the arrest of a black college student traveling with his swim team. He was wrongfully arrested and has filed a lawsuit. And our interview with Chasten Buttigieg, what he thinks about the possibility of becoming the first gentleman, and his response to Rush Limbaugh's assertion that America may not be ready to elect a gay president.
ABC News, straightforward.
All right, folks, it is that time again. We are bringing back our series, Running Mates. Forget campaign ads or debate sound bites. To really get to know the candidates, we are going straight to the source, to their better halves, their spouses, or collectively, their spice. And tonight we sit down with Chasten Buttigieg. He gets personal about his own struggles and why he loves Pete as a person and potential president. And he also claps back at Rush Limbaugh for comments he made directed at his husband. What made you fall in love with him?
His heart. He made me feel so loved right away.
There's nothing unusual about the real-life running mate of a presidential candidate gushing about their spouse.
With all of the roller coasters of running for president, he still is such a wonderful husband.
But Chasten Buttigieg, professing his love for the former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Pete Buttigieg, is groundbreaking.
What a gift, what a privilege to be able to share this experience with him and go out there and show up for people who need him the most.
The success of his husband, the first openly gay man to launch a major presidential campaign in U.S. history, is itself historic. When Mayor Pete declared victory in the Iowa caucus,
we are going on to New Hampshire victorious,
and finished a close second in New Hampshire,
we are here to stay.
There was Chasten right by his side, beaming.
The love of my life, who keeps me grounded. How about a hand for the future First Gentleman of the United States? Let's hear it for Chasten.
Chasten Glesman met Pete Buttigieg on the dating app Hinge in 2015.
I won't lie, it was the picture of him in the military. I tell the truth. And I fell hard and fast for Pete.
3 years later, they got married, Chasten taking his husband's last name.
I just want our kids to have the same last name. And I know this is probably going to sound really funny, but I really like Buttigieg.
They were married for less than a year before Peter, as Chasten likes to call him,
I am a proud son of South Bend, Indiana, and I am running for president of the United States.
Decided to run for president. So how has that been for your marriage? I mean, essentially, you're still newlyweds.
Yeah, I mean, there's no denying it's hard, but it is a sacrifice that's worth making because I have seen Peter go out there and change people's lives, save people's lives because of the visibility of this campaign and because of the message that he's offering the American people, a message of hope and inclusion and belonging. So I'm very proud to share him with the rest of the country.
Now, at just 30 years old, Chasten has become a powerful force on the campaign trail, amassing hundreds of thousands of followers on Twitter and Instagram, using both platforms to support his husband. You've become somewhat of a secret weapon of the campaign. I've heard at fundraisers, you are responsible for about like a third of the money that comes in.
You know, I think if you're looking for a presidential fundraising powerhouse, you know, people probably don't look for a middle school drama teacher, but I think I can connect with people as a person who came out in a country that made LGBTQ Americans feel disgusting and unwanted and unloved. I know what it's like to feel like this country doesn't stand for you.
Pete Buttigieg is campaigning on a message of inclusion.
This is our opportunity to build the most inclusive coalition that we have seen in modern times.
But many are questioning if the country is ready for a gay president. According to a Gallup poll that came out in January, 21% of Americans said that they would not vote for a gay president. Does that number surprise you, either being high or low?
No, but again, I focus on the work. I focus on going out there and showing people who I am. And I think we have an opportunity right now to beckon Americans to a higher calling and to welcome people onto the right side of history.
Conservative radio show host Rush Limbaugh recently weighed in on the matter.
They've got to be saying that despite all the great progress and despite all the great wokeness and despite all the great ground that's been covered, America's still not ready to elect a gay guy kissing his husband on the debate stage president.
At a CNN town hall in Nevada this week, Buttigieg hit back.
One thing about my marriage is it's never involved me having to send hush money to a porn star after cheating on my spouse.
We've heard from Pete in his response on that. What's your response to it?
I've been dealing with this my whole life. I dealt with a multitude of Rush Limbaughs when I was walking through the hallways of my high school. You saw that Pete is ready to go toe-to-toe with this president, and Pete can take on, you know, the likes of Rush Limbaugh. But I'm more worried about the kids. I'm more worried about the people in this country who are watching how we treat this candidacy, treat this campaign, and the way we treat people who for so long have been attacked by people like Rush Limbaugh and this president. And I think it is time for moral leadership to be restored to the White House. So when you are ready to share that deepest truth about yourself, when you are ready to step out of the closet, you step out into something hopeful and inclusive, and you look up to Washington and you see a president who cares about you and loves you.
Chasten's ascent to what would be the nation's first gentleman is not always easy. He grew up in rural Michigan, where he says he always felt different.
I grew up in a pretty socially conservative place. I went to a school where, if you weren't on the football team or one of the jocks, that, you were picked on and bullied and belittled.
Being gay made things even harder. At one point, you were homeless?
When I came out, I was certain that I'd lose everything. I was so certain that I would be a disappointment to my family and my community and my church and my friends, that rather than stick around and find out if it was going to be okay, I ran away from it. And sometimes I slept on my friends' couches and floors, and sometimes I felt like I was a burden even on my friends, and so I would just sleep in the back of my car. But I have a happy ending to that story. I got to go home. I got to go home to two loving parents who were terrified for me because they loved me, but they knew it was going to be hard. And I'm very, very lucky. Not every kid has that story. 40% of homeless youth in this country are LGBTQ.
It was his own experience that shaped Chasten's work as an advocate for LGBTQ youth.
I have spent the last year traveling and meeting with kids all over the country. In the last year alone, I've visited about 100 LGBTQ centers and homeless service providers, meeting with kids, sharing my story and listening to theirs.
He says this election is not about policy. For him, it's personal. From homelessness to health care to the Me Too movement, Chasten says he can relate, even recalling a time he says he was sexually assaulted when he was 18.
I remember somehow feeling like my parents would be so disappointed in me. And I don't know what it was about society that made me feel somehow that I had done something wrong. And to feel such shame and guilt for somebody else taking advantage of me. And I'm so grateful for everyone who has spoken up, because it made me feel less alone too, as somebody who held on to that for a really long time. And unfortunately, that shaped me in a really negative way, trying to open up.
While they live in South Bend with their two rescue dogs, Truman and Buddy, the campaign trail often keeps them apart.
Unfortunately, we're not going to our home as much, and so we're just passing each other in the sky.
But Chasten says through the craziness of the campaign, his husband never lets him forget how loved he is.
He's really good at that. He is really good at taking the time to write out a little poem or a little letter. And he's also deeply reflective. And he'll write a story that I'd completely forgotten about. Do you remember that time we, sat at a cafe in Paris and watched the world go by? And I know it's crazy out there right now, but when you're far away and you're missing me, think of that moment.
Even before the final votes are tallied, in many respects, Chasten feels they're already victorious. So even if Pete were not to win the presidency, do you feel like there's already been a substantial shift and change in that vein and others that you've observed firsthand being on the campaign trail?
Yeah, I obviously want Pete to be president, but if for some reason it doesn't work out, I will not for one moment hang my head in shame.
Our thanks to Chasten for sitting with us. And we still have a lot of news to get here on ABC News Live. The deadly terror attack, a gunman in Germany opening fire in two bars popular with immigrants. What we're now learning about the motive. And the heart-stopping landing on a Florida runway. And our tweet of the day, Billie Jean King on becoming a Barbie.
ABC News, straightforward.
The Mueller investigation may seem like it was a lifetime ago, but today's sentencing of Trump ally Roger Stone is just the latest in a long list. So let's take a look by the numbers. Stone's 40-month sentence for crimes including obstruction of justice, lying to Congress, and witness tampering makes him the 7th person convicted and sentenced in connection to the Mueller investigation. The longest sentence handed down, 7.5 years, to former Trump 2016 campaign chairman Paul Manafort for bank and tax fraud charges. Serving 3 years in prison, former Trump personal attorney Michael Cohen on charges including campaign finance violations related to hush money payments on behalf of Trump. Former Trump campaign aide Rick Gates was sentenced to 45 days after cooperating in the Mueller investigation, including testifying against Manafort. And former Trump campaign advisor George Papadopoulos served 12 days for lying to investigators about Russian contacts. One person still awaits sentencing. Former Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. In addition, 12 Russian military intelligence officers and 13 Russian nationals were indicted for their role in interfering in the 2016 election. And we still have a lot of news to report tonight. The desperate race to pull a trapped driver from the scene of a school bus crash. And former Congresswoman Katie Hill, she resigned from office after nude pictures of her with a campaign aide were leaked. Tonight, why she rejects the term revenge porn. But first, here's a look at some of the trending stories on abcnews.com.
ABC News, straightforward.
Roger Stone emerged from federal court in Washington, D.C., not saying a word, but with a smile on his face. Stone sentenced to 3 years and 4 months in prison with 2 years probation, convicted in November on 7 counts, including lying to investigators, obstruction of Congress, and witness tampering, all charges tied to Robert Mueller's 2016 Russian election interference probe. A possible pardon from President Trump had been looming over the trial. The Justice Department amended its own prosecutor's sentence recommendation of up to 9 years. Last week, President Trump said a forewoman in the case had significant bias, and that led Stone to request a new trial. So right now, unclear when Stone will actually start his prison time.
Their latest debate behind them, the Democratic presidential candidates are back on the campaign trail. Nevada's caucuses are Saturday. Bloomberg is not on the ballot. And today, election officials say at least 75,000 Democrats cast early ballots.
President Trump will rally tomorrow in Las Vegas with Nevada caucus voting going on all week. The South Carolina primary is a week from Saturday. Super Tuesday is March 3rd.
Federal authorities are now heading the investigation into last night's deadly shootings in Germany. They say the suspect appears to have been motivated by far-right beliefs. At least 11 people are dead, including the gunman.
They found the 43-year-old man dead, along with his 72-year-old mother. A weapon was found alongside his body. He's understood to have owned the gun legally and was described as an expert marksman by one official. This attack, the latest in a spate of far-right terror attacks and plots to plague Germany in recent months.
Dozens more Americans evacuated from the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak in China 2 weeks ago, released from quarantine here in the U.S. But new concerns about some of the evacuees from that cruise ship docked in Japan, where more than 600 people were sickened. At least a dozen Americans now in isolation, undergoing evaluation for the virus in California. Back in Japan, officials announcing the first deaths from the virus-stricken vessel. A couple in their 80s and surging fear in one South Korean city after 35 new patients were diagnosed. The mayor there urging all 2.5 million residents to wear masks and remain indoors.
An overturned fuel tanker on a busy interstate caused a massive fireball in Indianapolis. Black smoke filled the sky over the city, with the fire stretching over 500 feet. 4,000 gallons of jet fuel spilled onto the scene. The truck driver managed to get out of the vehicle, but was caught in the aftermath of the explosion. Good Samaritans jumped in, rescued him from the vehicle. The driver is in critical condition tonight. Sparks were flying as a small plane made a very hard landing at the Daytona International Airport this afternoon. The aircraft's landing gear failed to open, causing flames to jump out as it slid across the runway. Fire crews tended to the scene, and thankfully no one was injured. The NTSB is investigating. And police in Illinois are apologizing tonight to a black student athlete who says he was wrongfully detained in a lawsuit against the department. The Rock Island County Sheriff's Department released dashcam video of two officers running toward a bus near a rest stop. They were responding to a call that shots were fired in the area. That's when the officers encountered 19-year-old Jalen Butler, who was riding the bus with the rest of the Eastern Illinois swim team. Butler says the officers used excessive force and threatened to shoot him. After initially saying the accusation was without merit, today officials apologized.
Mr. Jalen Butler did not deserve to fear for his life that evening, and for that we are sorry.
The department says it's conducting a thorough, fair, and transparent investigation. Now to a terror attack in Germany. 11 are dead in a murder spree that started in two separate hookah lounges. Tonight, authorities say the suspected gunman appears to have been motivated by racist far-right views. The massacre in the Frankfurt suburbs of Hanau erupted around 10 o'clock last night. James Longman has more on this incident and why German Chancellor Angela Merkel is calling racism a poison in that nation's society.
Tonight, a far-right terror attack in the heart of a migrant community in Germany. A man opening fire in this hookah lounge in Hanau near Frankfurt. Gun casings and broken glass, the only sign of the carnage inside. He then drove to this second cafe nearby to continue his spree. This man was shot in the arm. He says he laid on top of someone and pretended to be dead. Police say the man killed 9 people before they tracked his black BMW to a local address, finding the suspect and his 72-year-old mother dead inside. He's been identified only as 43-year-old Tobias R. Authorities are examining writings and a video in which he reportedly expresses desire to exterminate certain races and details conspiracy theories about the United States. Authorities say his attacks had an explicit anti-foreigner motive.
I would understand Frankfurt or Berlin, okay, but Hanau? I can't believe it.
After the killings, thousands turned out in solidarity across the country.
We came here expecting to find a vigil, but actually it feels more like a rally. There's been an uptick in far-right attacks here in Germany, and people here are angry. They feel the politics of hate is on the rise.
This is the third far-right attack in Germany in just the last 9 months, a worrying trend.
James Longman joins us now from Hanau, Germany. James, give us a sense of the concern over there about these far-right attacks.
Yeah, Lindsay. I mean, Angela Merkel said it herself. She called this a poison in German society. And this is something that's been going on for quite some time. The last time, actually, I was in Germany was just in October at a synagogue attack in Halle, which is a town just near Berlin. An individual entered there, killed 2 people and injured many others. Months earlier, a pro-migration politician, if you like, here was assassinated by a far-right group. And just last week, in fact, a terror plot, 12 people were arrested for their plans to attack mosques across this country. It was kind of a recreation of what we saw in New Zealand, and that anniversary, of course, is coming up next month. So this is pervasive, and it's a real worry for German authorities.
And speaking of pervasive, vigils across, like you're standing in front of, have been happening quite often across Germany. Has that struck a chord?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, we went to a vigil tonight, and it felt more like a political rally. You know, people here are angry at what they see as hatred being stirred up. I think it goes back to 2015, the migration crisis. We remember those pictures of huge numbers of people coming from the Middle East and North Africa. It has changed the demographic balance here in Germany, I think it's fair to say. Just more than 2 million people came here. There were legitimate concerns that people had, but those concerns have been turned into hatred, both on a political sense at the ballot box. We've seen the AfD, a far-right party, gain power here, but also in people's minds. And I think that's what's really concerning here. And this individual who struck these shisha bars here in town and then killed his mother and then killed himself is part of a wider problem, not just in Germany, but across Europe, actually. Nationalism very much on the march. Lindsay.
Okay, thank you very much for that. James Longman for us in Germany. And now to that just-released body camera video from Jersey City recorded last December. Police officers caught in the crossfire as a panic-stricken community shelters in place. Take a listen. Four bystanders, including a veteran Jersey City police officer, had died a short time before what you just saw during what officials later described as a hate-fueled terror spree. As you can see, officers used the Sacred Heart School as a shelter. 2 officers were injured during this gun battle. Surveillance footage then shows the 2 suspects getting out of their van and shooting into the kosher market. Eventually, body camera shows the officers using a SWAT car to ram the front of the market where the shooters killed 3 shoppers. Officers shot and killed the 2 shooters. The shooting spree had started at a nearby cemetery where Detective Joseph Seals was killed while working a separate investigation. Now to a dramatic school bus crash in New Jersey. Thankfully, no children were on board as the bus careened off the side of the road in Bridgewater, not far from New York City. The driver was trapped for more than an hour. And a paraglider found himself in a very tricky situation, getting stuck in a set of high-voltage power lines for more than 3 hours. The paraglider, whose training flight went wrong, was eventually taken down by firefighters who had to make sure the power lines were de-energized before the rescue effort even began. Power was eventually restored to the area, and the paraglider was relatively unharmed. And burning rubber, a rare Ferrari went up in flames in Monaco. The vintage F40 was worth more than $1 million. It's not clear just how the flames started, but unfortunately, this car will not be hitting the road again anytime soon. Turning now to an exclusive interview with Katie Hill. She's the congresswoman who resigned after nude pictures of her with a campaign aide were leaked online. Our chief anchor, George Stephanopoulos, sat down with Hill as she reflected on her meteoric rise and fall in politics. She also explains why she rejects the term revenge porn.
This is the last speech that I will give from this floor as a member of Congress.
Once a rising star in the Democratic Party, Katie Hill, a 32-year-old freshman congresswoman from California, resigned less than a year after taking office.
Was the biggest mistake having a relationship with a campaign staffer?
Absolutely. When I started to run for Congress, I was a nobody. I was a nonprofit director that 29 years old when I jumped in. I did not have any political experience, and so I was a complete long shot. But my team, which built over time, was, especially the people who were there in the beginning, it never felt like a an employer-employee relationship in the way that I'd been an executive at a large organization before. The boundaries were completely different because you're truly in the trenches with this very small team. Where I think I made the biggest mistake was not setting those boundaries from the very beginning.
In October, intimate photos and text messages of Hill began leaking online. Hill, who was in the midst of a divorce, has accused her estranged husband, Kenny Heslop, of leaking the photos in an act of cyber exploitation.
The photos are released. You're also accused not only of having a relationship with a campaign staffer, but having a relationship with someone on your congressional staff, which obviously would cross all kinds of ethical lines.
That accusation came from my ex-husband, and it launched a...
It's not true.
No, especially the person that he was accusing me of was somebody he was my first hire. Right, he was the first person who worked on my campaign, and he came with me to Washington, and we were friends, and it shows you how easy it is to, when you're talking about someone, especially a woman, being a victim of something like the photos, right, or cyber exploitation or revenge porn or whatever you want to call it.
What do you want to call it?
Well, there's a problem with the term revenge porn because it implies, A, that there's something to be taking revenge for, right, that the woman maybe did something wrong in the first place. And pornography also could imply that it was consensual, and it's not.
Lawyers for Hill's estranged husband tell ABC News that Ms. Hill made no allegations of abuse in her petition for dissolution. Mr. Heslop denies any allegations of abuse or wrongdoing outright. The parties are currently in the process of negotiating an amicable settlement. Mr. Heslop respectfully asked for privacy during this time.
And how much of you regrets the decision to actually resign? Any part of you think you should have stayed and fought?
I strongly feel that I made the right call in stepping down for several reasons, one of which is that I did not want to be a liability to my colleagues. We knew from the people who had the photos that had obtained the photos that there were hundreds more images and text messages that were out there that I had no idea what they could be or how they could be taken out of context.
Your story exploded. And I guess political scandals always explode to some degree, but how much of it is tied to the fact in your mind that you're bisexual?
I think a lot of it is, and it's also partly because I'm a woman. We haven't seen as many, right, of the sex scandals with women, but the bisexuality is a huge part of it, right? There's a fantasy element of it. There's biphobia that is rampant still, and certainly misunderstanding of what bisexuality is, and it's sensationalizing, right? The headlines are much better than just, oh, Congresswoman has, affair with a former campaign staffer.
You wrote in the days after your resignation, it seemed like you were very close to suicide. What stopped you from taking that final fatal step?
It was my family, and it was the people who I knew it would, for lack of a better word, break. But I knew of all the girls and young women who looked up to me, who saw this happen to me, if the ultimate outcome was that this destroyed me and I committed suicide, what does that tell them? And that couldn't be my final story.
Our thanks to George for that. Coming up, the race to save a choking toddler. His parents desperate for help find it just in the nick of time. The full story when we come back. Stay with us.
ABC News, straightforward.
it's the equipment. It's very rigid. They can't.
We're back now with a live look at the president continuing his campaign swing through western states. This is the scene right now at an arena in Colorado Springs. The president at the microphone rallying supporters and going on the offense against Democrats after last night's debate. Now to a situation that is most parents' worst nightmare. Your toddler starts choking and panic sets in. Thankfully for the family you're about to meet, a state trooper wasn't too far away. These heart-stopping moments captured on police dash cam. It was a life-or-death moment for 11-month-old Elikai Corona, choking in the backseat of this car. When a New Mexico State police officer gets the frantic 911 call and whips his car around, racing against time to save the toddler. It was Super Bowl Sunday and the morning after Elikai's parents' wedding.
I walked away to put the spoon in the sink. Well, by the time I came back, I noticed he had something in his mouth.
The 11-month-old started choking on a decorative plastic star brought back from the wedding.
He turns him over and he starts, hitting him on the back.
Those blows unsuccessful. The family decides to race to the hospital, calling 911 on the way, knowing every second is vital for the toddler.
We had done the Heimlich and it didn't work, and at this point the baby was already turning blue.
That's when quick-thinking State Trooper Mario Herrera hears the call over his radio and knows he can get to the child before they reach the hospital.
It said the medics were getting paged out to milepost 202 on U.S. Highway 84 in reference to a baby that was choking in the back seat.
His dash cam captures his patrol car racing through Espanola, desperately trying to get to Elikai in time.
We're like, this is real, my goodness, he might not come back from this.
You see the car doors fly open and Officer Herrera grabs the toddler. You hear him as he hits Elikai on the back. Then, a cry. Officer Herrera saves the toddler just in time.
And once I heard him cry, I knew, I was like, we're good.
This smiling, chubby-cheeked 11-month-old is alive today because of this state police officer. And while for Officer Herrera, he's just doing his job.
Wearing this uniform, you kind of have to be kind of tough, but there's times where you can't. Kids are that time.
To the Coronas.
You're just an angel on earth for us because we thought at some point we had lost him.
He will forever be a hero.
We're just thankful for people like him.
A relief that all parents can relate to. Before we go tonight, the image of the day, a soldier reuniting with his daughter after returning home from the Middle East. Look at that. The 82nd Airborne had rushed soldiers to Kuwait after the U.S. drone strike in January that killed a top Iranian general. 800 soldiers returned home today. Welcome back to all of them, and that's our show for this hour. Stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us.